Let us begin. Good evening. Good evening, dear friends. Here we are. A new year, 2022. So I hope that 2022 is treating you well, and it should be a year filled with blessings. On the one hand, we've already had our New Year's, Rosh Hashanah. I once heard a rabbi wish his congregation happy new fiscal year. Happy fiscal new year. All right, okay. So whatever it is, happy fiscal new year or full-on new year. You know, there's a verse in Psalms where it says that God counts based on the countings of the nations of the world. So even if within Judaism we know when the real new year is, but still when the secular world counts new year, it's of significance as well. So I want to wish all of you that we should have a 2022, a happy new secular year. Yeah. Filled with goodness and blessings, and it should only be better and upwards, filled with hope and happiness for the upcoming 12 months and beyond. So with all that, we are going to study Tanya, and this is our fourth class, which is wonderful. Our sages say that 3 times makes something real. A chazakah is the Hebrew word. It cements it as a real thing. So 3 times. We're on our 4th time, so we've done the 3, which is very exciting, and a few little announcements. Number 1, I want to dedicate tonight's class, which is not just tonight, but it's also this morning's class, right? Our sister class in the morning, to a dear friend who recently just passed away, which some of you may have known, Dr. Scott Goldberg, who passed away a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. His Hebrew name is Ephraim Simcha ben Yaakov. So we're going to be dedicating tonight's class in loving memory and a mitzvah dedicated to the soul of Ephraim Simcha ben Yaakov. May the mitzvah of all of our Torah study tonight bring tremendous joy and nachas and comfort to his soul above. Okay, and thank you, Baruch, for the inspiration to dedicate tonight's class to him, to his memory, and for his soul. So thank you, Baruch. Okay, a little housekeeping. Number 1, the way we have scheduled these Tanya classes is that we learn Tanya in between the JLI courses. 4 times a year, as I'm sure most of you are familiar with. 4 times a year we have our official 6-week course, and Tanya we've instituted to be in between. So here's a schedule. Our upcoming course is beginning Wednesday, February 2nd, and goes on for 6 Wednesdays, which means that starting at the beginning of February, this Tanya class is going to go on a little hiatus. We're not going to stop learning. We're going to continue learning every Wednesday, but we're going to be doing the 6-week course titled Meditation from Sinai, and that is a very exciting course. I definitely would love for all of you to join that. I'll maybe share with you a word about that in a moment. So this is the schedule. We have 4 classes left. Tonight's class and another 3 classes for Tanya until we go on a hiatus until mid-March. Okay, that's that. Meditation from Sinai, a wonderful course. We're going to be exploring not a Jewish spin on popular Eastern meditation. That's not what we're going to be doing. That stuff does exist. There's many books on that. A Jewish spin on Eastern meditation. We're going to be taking a real hard look at authentic Jewish tradition, and Jewish tradition actually comes as part of the package with meditational teachings. So it's going to be very exciting. It's going to be beautiful, powerful ideas, rich, authentic Jewish ideas from the Torah. But all the ideas from the Torah which are about meditation. And it's going to be absolutely wonderful. And a little spoiler alert, we will be quoting quite a bit from Tanya in the course. So it'll even be a little bit of a Tanya course as well. And the course is accredited for social workers. It's one of those courses. I'm very happy and excited about that. So I already sent out 1 email. You'll be getting a brochure in your mail, hopefully one of these days about it. So the marketing machine is definitely starting up here at Chabad for Meditation from Sinai. Stay tuned. Okay, here's where we are holding. We are today going to conclude the author's introduction. We have very little left. And we're going to actually begin chapter 1 of Tanya, so which is very exciting. Here we are. We're actually going to start really digging into Tanya. Until now, we've been, so what have we done until now? I've given you a bit of an extensive historical introduction to what the Tanya is, to what this movement of Hasidus is. It's like that we kind of understand, we have the historical context, historical appreciation to what this book is and what this book was intended to do, etc. We've studied the author's introduction. We're getting a much better feel for why the author wrote the book, the concerns of his community, and all that good stuff. Okay. And now we're going to read the last section of the author's introduction, which is on page 16. Now, this is in your handout, the previous handout, which is, it says on the front, approbations and author's introduction. That's what it looks like. I apologize, there's two separate handouts. There's a new one, there's the old one. Next time I'll send out one file which has all of it. Okay. I'll keep that in mind for next time. So pre-publication notes. This is a very, very, the author's introduction was quite scholarly and heavy and deep. This is a pretty simple closing message. It's very practical. It's basic housekeeping before the book goes to print. And a little bit of history isn't due to understand what this pre-publication note is. So originally, the Tanya was not printed as a book. Originally, the Tanya was unofficial manuscripts that just organically spread throughout communities. So the Alter Rebbe released chapter 1. It was a handwritten document, a handwritten little pamphlet. And those pamphlets kind of traveled on their own. Let's say you lived in a little city. Let's say you lived in Jitome, all right? Wasn't such a small little city. Let's say you lived in Jitome. And all of a sudden you hear, oh, there's a Jewish visitor, a Jewish traveler who happens to have a copy of chapter 1 of Tanya. So you are very excited. So you run over to him and say, oh, can I please borrow your chapter 1 of Tanya? I'll make a handwritten manuscript. It's like that. I have chapter 1 of Tanya. And that's how it worked. It was just every chapter was its own little manuscript, and it was a collector's item. People were so excited. All of a sudden you would get a, somebody would come by, or a relative sent you a manuscript of chapter 17. Oh, they have chapter 17. And that's how kind of Tanya had this very unofficial, organic fan base. Now, the Alter Rebbe was hesitant to go to print. He felt that it was a very, very daunting task. It was going to be such a big book. We see that he went to fellow rabbis to get their kind of approval before going to print. It was a daunting thing for Jewish mysticism to go to become, to go into the public arena in such a way. What compelled the Alter Rebbe to finally go to print with Tanya and officially print the book, to sell it wholesale, was because there were two problems. Problem number one is manuscripts started getting pretty heavily filled with mistakes and errors, which is very common, right? When you copy, when you handwrite, when you simply copy with your handwriting, one document to another document, it's very easy to make a mistake. You skip a line, you misspell a word, you think it's one word, so it really turns into another word. And that was happening quite a lot. Yes, Moshe.
In Hebrew, I'm sure they didn't use vowels. It's even more ambiguous in many ways.
Yeah, that's true. The Hebrew is maybe more prone to mistakes than even English. It's a good point, Moshe, yeah. But that's what was happening. We're talking about copy after copy after copy. 30 generations of copies, just like viruses mutate. The manuscripts were starting to mutate as well. And all of a sudden we have these different versions. Nobody knows what's the legitimate thing. Certain manuscripts starting to become not legible. Like, what is it? So that was problem number one. Problem number two is that the Alter Rebbe had certain people in the Jewish community who were not fans of his. It's one of the curses that every single great Jewish leader has had throughout history. Every great Jewish leader has their detractors, the people who just, for some reason, don't want them and want to hurt them. It's somewhat of a sign of greatness. If you're a rabbi and you don't have a team of enemies, you're probably not great. Okay, but in any case, so the Alter Rebbe had these detractors. We're not going to go into the whole history of it. We actually once did a class exactly about the historical debate of the Hasidic movement and the group of Jews who were against the Hasidic movement. And just to clarify, some rabbis were hesitant or suspicious of a new movement in the Jewish world. New movements could also sometimes be dangerous. They could sometimes be detrimental to the Jewish community. So, certain criticism or certain suspicion of the Hasidic community was valid. But then there were certain people which just liked a good fight and just politicized the issue, and they just made trouble. What they were doing was they would go take the manuscripts of Tanya and deliberately make small little edits that would hurt the manuscript. They would maybe add in something which was a little bit heretical, something that would turn people off. And then they spread these manuscripts, which were intentionally forged and messed around with. And that was a way to tarnish the reputation of the Alter Rebbe and to get Jews to say, this is not for me. So we have these problems. Manuscripts were really losing their authenticity, either intentionally or unintentionally. So the Alter Rebbe said, we got to go to print. The Alter Rebbe worked very, very hard. The Alter Rebbe actually rewrote the entire Tanya, made a second version of Tanya for the print, for the official printing. And the Alter Rebbe meticulously made sure that it was very well copy edited. All mistakes were removed, that it should be a clean manuscript, and the Alter Rebbe went to print. Now, one last point. Going to print those days was a massive undertaking. Today, you could print books online with a hardcover, with a soft cover, with a jacket. It's cheap, it's quick. You have these laser printers. It's not a big deal. Back then, publishing a book was a tremendous undertaking. It was a tremendous investment, a financial investment. It took months of hard work, real labor, a whole team to just do what's called the typeface. Today, you just type on a computer. Right? Back then, you had to literally take, it was metal or wood pieces, and you had to lay them out on a board, and you had to make I forgot what it's called, a mold or something, of the page. It was a big, big deal. And the Tanya was a few hundred pages total, the whole book. It was months and months of work. And there was a concern those days. There's a concern those days. Even those days, before copy machines, there was some mechanism, certain chemicals with which you could copy paper. You take a book and there was an easy way, a very cheap way to copy, to make a stamp, and you could just copy a book. And that was a concern for publishers, that they didn't want to print books. It was a copyright issue. Today, the law stands behind us, right there. We have copyright laws. Back in those days, there was no government protecting your copyright. So this is kind of where the Alter Rebbe writes a little note before printing the Tanya in the introduction, which speaks a little bit about this. Let's read it. Just an interesting, it's part of the introduction, so we'll read it. Page 16 in the middle, where it says Part 3, pre-publication note. Here we go. The Alter Rebbe writes, now, as these above-mentioned pamphlets spread throughout the entire community, stated above, by means of numerous transcriptions at the hands of many various copyists, the multitude of transcriptions has given rise to an exceedingly great number of textual errors. That's the fact. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe says, and this has prompted the generous spirit of those noble men mentioned on the previous page. Their names are Rabbi Shalom Shachne Altshuler and Rabbi Mordechai Horowitz. If you know any Horowitzes, maybe this is their ancestor. I don't know. You know any Horowitzes? I bet you don't know any Altschulers. Huh? You know any Altschulers? Okay, I don't know. Horowitz is a more prevalent name. Okay, so to go to great personal and financial lengths to publish the above-mentioned pamphlets in an edition that is completely untainted, free from copyists' errors, and carefully proofread. I congratulate them on this worthy deed. All right. Okay, here goes the author of his message, page 17. And since scripture states explicitly, cursed is he who encroaches on their neighbor's border. And where the term cursed, the Hebrew word is arur, is used, it implies both curse and excommunication, God forbid. It's a very, very serious transgression of the Torah to ever violate, encroach upon somebody else's territory, their border. Even in business, right? Opening up a competition, there's a lot of laws about this in Jewish law. It's not so simple. You got to make sure that you're playing it by the rules. Okay, right. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe says, therefore, I come to reinforce an explicit scriptural statement to place a strict prohibition on all publishers against publishing the above-mentioned pamphlets of the Tanya, neither by themselves or through their agents, without the permission of the above-mentioned authorized publishers, for a period of 5 years from the day of publication of this book. So the Alter Rebbe is establishing, not through law, not through secular law, but simply by the power of his rabbinic authority, that nobody has the right to print the Tanya for 5 years. Now, 5 years might not seem like a lot of time, but I just want to clarify. The 5-year buffer, the 5-year buffer before anyone else could print the Tanya wasn't only from the first publishing, but from the last publishing. So what that means is, whenever the publisher prints a new printing of the Tanya, the clock starts again, right? Now, the reason for this law is there were two concerns. On the one hand, you wanted to make sure that the original publishers have the copyrights and that they have the sole authority to print the book, so like that they could recoup their investment. On the other hand, you don't want a publishing house to kind of have a stranglehold on a copy, on a book, on a trademark book, and they're lazy, they're not reprinting it, and it's in high demand, and they're just not printing it for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. So this was common practice in the Jewish community. When a book is printed, every printer either got a 3-year buffer or a 5-year buffer where nobody else is allowed to print it. But if 3 years or 5 years, depending on the book, in the beginning of each book, it said what the terms were. If X amount of years went by and the original publishers did not reprint it, the copyright is over and any other printer could now print this text. This was very standard in the Jewish world of 200 years ago, 150 years ago. This was how copyright works, where the publisher would write at the beginning how long the original printers have copyright for. Okay, let's conclude the text. And those who adhere to this ruling will delight, and the blessing of goodness will come upon them. That's a verse from Proverbs. These are the words of the author of the above-mentioned Likutei Amarim, Rabbi Shneur Zalman. All right, nice, sweet little ending that we're going to print and that we have copyright concerns. Okay, now what's very interesting is the Alter Rebbe and the original publishers had very good concern, had very good reason to be worried that other publishers would want to copy and print the Tanya, because the Tanya became an absolute bestseller. It flew off the shelves like hotcake. We have record, it's printed in the back of Tanya. Every single edition of Tanya, there's a record of. So the Tanya was first printed in the city of Slavita by these two business partners, Rabbi Altshuler and Rabbi Horowitz. It was originally printed in 1796 or 1797. All right, it was printed right around New Year's of the secular year. So we're not sure exactly if it was at the very end of 1796 or the very beginning of 1797. At any rate, the first print of Tanya was printed 15,000 copies. A year later, an additional 5,000 copies were printed. A year later, an additional 20,000 copies were printed. And every single year from there on, there was at least one printing. Now, what this tells us is that the Tanya was an exceptionally, it performed very well in the market. You have to realize, I'm looking at some of your videos over here. Some of you have bookcases in your back, right? We all have books. We all have a bookcase. We all have books. It's very cheap to buy books, right? You could buy a book for $5, $10. Back then, buying a book was at least minimum half a week's wage. You paid very, very big money for a book because books then were also a piece of art. If you've ever seen a book printed 200 years ago, 300 years ago, it's real, the paper quality, the ink quality, they hold up better. They have better survival than books printed 60 years ago. It was very expensive to buy a book. And Jews, people owned 5 books. That's all you owned in life. Who had money for books back then? Everybody owned a siddur, a prayer book. Everybody owned a chumash, a book of Torah. Maybe 1 or 2 other books. People didn't buy books. You went to the synagogue. The synagogue had 1 volume, a torn up old ancient set of Talmud. You studied that, right? So the Tanya was a very big testament to the success of the Tanya, that within 3 years, 40,000 copies were sold, and it was an absolute bestseller. So it was very important that the original publishers had the copyright so that they could recoup their investment. There was definitely tremendous demand for Tanya. And we know that the Tanya really spread all throughout Europe. It was printed in Ukraine, but the word of the Tanya spread all the way west in Western Europe. It was a very hot item. And I think we'll see soon, we'll experience on our own why the Tanya had such an appeal to the Jewish community then. Okay, it's an interesting question. Where does a spiritual journey begin? Where does a book of practical Jewish guidance begin? All right? There's so many questions, hundreds of questions, thousands of questions. When it comes to our personal lives, personal development, spiritual development, trying to get a little bit more in touch with our souls. But where do we begin? So it's quite evident from the Tanya that the opening question of the Tanya is, what should we be expecting from ourselves? I think there's 2 questions. What is our self-image? And what should be our expectations? We all have a self-image. And our self-image definitely is a very big factor in the choices we make in life and what we choose to do, how we choose to lead our life. And then there's also expectations. What do I want to be, right? We always ask our children, what do you want to be when you grow up? And we all ask that questions of ourselves. What do we want to be when we grow up, right? We all have more to grow up. So what do we want to be? What is a healthy expectation? And to make the question a little bit more serious, the question is also, what does God expect from me? What does God actually expect from us? It's easy to say that God wants us to be perfect. Be kind, be good, be holy. Don't commit any sins. Don't be nasty. You have to do every mitzvah. Be a saint. Be a saint. Just don't get anything wrong. But practically, we all know that we're not perfect. We all have our weaknesses. We all have our struggles. We all have the things that we get right. We all have the things that we get wrong. What is a realistic bar of expectation for all of us, for regular people? And we know we're not ever going to be 100% perfect, right? We're never going to be picture perfect. But there is some level of perfection. There is some version of perfect that we could attain and that we ought to attain. We must attain. That's the question here. I think the first question of a spiritual journey is, what do I ever want for myself? What do I want to become? So the Tanya begins by turning to the holy books. We have a tradition. We have great books. The Jewish tradition. Does it say there? What is the expectation? What does God expect from us? So the Tanya begins with a quote where we have right there in front of us an actual text of what God expects from us. You ready? Here we go. It is page 19 in your book, although there's no actual page 19. The next page says 20, so you could deduce that the previous page is page 19. All right, that's called critical thinking. All right. So part 1 of chapter 1, the oath that defines our life's mission. The sages taught at the end of chapter 3 of Tractate Nida. All right, if you want to look it up, Talmud, Tractate Nida, end of chapter 3. By the way, do you know why the Tanya is called Tanya? Because the first word of the book is Tanya. What does Tanya mean? Tanya means we've learned from the sages. So that's it. First word of the book is Tanya. We call it Tanya. Now, before we read this text, I want to give you some background. Very fascinating piece of Talmud. The Talmud gives us a spiritual look at what is happening during the 9 months of pregnancy. We all know what's happening physically, biologically. There's conception, there's an embryo, it develops into a fetus, and 9 months later, it emerges and life begins for another young little child. There's a lot of spiritual drama going on as well. Lots of spiritual drama. So the first thing that happens is at the very moment of conception for every child, God assigns an angel to be in charge of this embryo, of this fetus, of this soul. And there's a lot going on. One of the things that this angel does is that for the 9 months of pregnancy, the 9 developmental months gestation, the angel studies with the soul the entire Torah. And then after 9 months, it's time for life to begin. The soul gets dispatched. And we all know, I don't know if all of us here are parents, but for those of us who are parents, we all know the tremendous tension in the air when a child is being born. Of course, the mother is in labor. And for everybody there's a frenzy, there's this excitement. The air is thick. A new child's about to be born. And there's also a lot going on spiritually. The child is told by the angel that time's up, you got to go. The Talmud tells us that the soul becomes very pained. It's a very painful experience. It doesn't want to go. It doesn't want to be born. And the angel warns the child, I'm going to hit you on the lips. And that's going to cause you to forget all of our conversations. And that's what the angel does. That's why we don't know any Torah when we're born. We forget everything. But subconsciously, somewhere back there, we know it. And then the angel, it's the very last thing that happens before birth. The angel takes the soul and it administers an oath to the soul. You know, the same way when a public official, the president becomes president, and 11:59 a.m., time for the oath, right? You're about to enter office, you got to make your oath. We all have the same. We enter office. We began our life of service to God at the moment of birth, and we make an oath. What's the oath? This is important stuff, right? What is our oath? What are we here to protect? So here's the oath. You ready? Here's the quote from the Talmud. Before a child is born, his or her soul is made to swear an oath. And here's the text of the oath. Be a righteous person. In Hebrew, that's Tzadik. And do not be a wicked person. In Hebrew, that is rasha. Simple enough. Be righteous, don't be wicked. All right. And even if the entire world tells you you are righteous, the whole world says, look, you're a success story. You're righteous. you should consider yourself like a wicked person. So there's two clauses to the oath. Clause number 1, be righteous, don't be wicked. Clause number 2, even if everybody thinks you are righteous, you have to always consider yourself to be wicked. Your expectation is to be righteous, a tzaddik. Your self-image for life is that you are wicked. How does that sound? Does this sound like a good oath, or it's a little bit confusing? Carol, you like it? The Alter Rebbe says, this oath, we got to understand what's flying over here. The Alter is going to start asking some questions. And the questions are important because this is very relevant. You know, we all took this oath. So what's this deal, right? This is our oath. This is what we promised to accomplish in life. So the Alter Rebbe says, some clarification is needed. 2 questions. Question number 1. Doesn't the Mishnah say in Tractate Avos, that is the ethics of our fathers, right? Our beloved ethics of our fathers. So the ethics of our fathers, Tractate Avos, chapter 2. Doesn't it say there the precise opposite? It says, don't consider yourself to be a wicked person. Ethics of our fathers, it gives us some very practical advice. Never look at yourself like a loser. Don't walk around thinking I'm a wicked guy. Let's think practically. Why shouldn't you walk around thinking you're a wicked guy? Is that healthy? Is that a healthy person if you walk around the whole day? I'm wicked. I'm horrible. I'm diabolical. I don't think you're that healthy of a human being if that's what you're walking around thinking the whole day about yourself. So our sages give us some good advice. Don't think that about yourself. So Alter says, whoa, 1 second. One place in the Talmud is telling us that we all swore an oath. Always consider yourself wicked, like you're wicked. And then ethics of our fathers, never consider yourself to be wicked. What's going on over here? Okay, that's like a scholarly question. You know, source A contradicts source B. But here's the more fundamental question, the personal question, the psychological side of the question. Let's continue reading in text 2, in question 2. And also, if you consider yourself like a wicked person, let's think practically, let's think psychologically. You will become downhearted and depressed. If you walk around thinking you're wicked, you're going to be a depressed soul, probably. And you won't be able to worship God joyfully and positively. A Jew has to be happy. Necham, I'll get to your question in a moment. A Jew has to be happy. If you walk around moping a whole day and being downhearted and depressed that you are wicked and that you're a failure, you're probably not going to be happy. A Jew has to be happy. On the other side, let's say you say, okay, I won't be upset about it. I'm not going to care about the fact that I'm wicked. Oh, that's also a problem. The question continues. And if, on the other hand, you don't become sad at all from this wickedness of yours, then what's going to happen? You could come to be flippant about your moral and religious responsibilities, God forbid. That's also bad. Either you take the fact that you're wicked too seriously and it bothers you, it hurts you, you get all sad and depressed about it, or you say, I don't care. Well, that's also not good. We want you to care, right? By the way, this is the story of every single troubled kid in school. For the misfits, what first happens? Every misfit first, all their friends bully the kid, you're a misfit, you're stupid. The teacher maybe even bullies the kid on some, right? So first the kid gets very hurt. The kid wants to do good. I want to succeed. But I'm being forced into this image of a failure. So first they get depressed. At some point, every kid says, I can't handle it anymore. You know what? I don't care about the fact that I'm a misfit. I don't care about the fact I'm a failure. And what happens then? Now you're even more trouble. Now you have a kid who doesn't even care anymore. There's an absolute insincerity. I couldn't care. An apathy, a coldness. So the Alter Rebbe says, I don't get this whole oath. This whole oath makes no sense. Always strive to be righteous, but never actually think you've ever gotten anywhere. Always consider yourself wicked. Always consider yourself like you're a rasha. Dude, you're setting us up for failure. Now, these questions are not just questions that need to be answered. These questions are an entryway into further digging. You know, in Judaism, when we ask questions, questions are not just a technicality, a bump in the road. Oh, there's a question. Okay, let's remove the question. Let's keep on moving. A question is an opportunity to really dig deep. It's an opportunity for us to rethink everything. Take whatever we thought for granted and totally reanalyze it. Okay, so that's what the author is going to do. Let's look at some questions over here. Ooh, Julie's asking a great question. I like your question, Julie. Does the meaning of wicked really mean imperfect? Ooh, okay. What does the word rasha mean? This is going to be exactly where the author is going. When you hear the word Tzadik, that's Hebrew. Maybe you've heard that word before, a Tzadik, a righteous person. What do we say? Oh, righteous, okay. 1 second. What does that even mean? Let's define that. What's the criteria? What exactly makes somebody a tzaddik? What's the line? Let's rethink whatever we thought these definitions are. We have the word rasha. Rasha means somebody wicked, somebody bad. The word rasha in Hebrew is like similar to the word ra, which means means bad. But what does that even mean? What's a rasha? When is a person considered a rasha? What's the definition? So the author is going to say, let's rethink all these definitions. All these words that we use sometimes quite commonly, good person, bad person. Well, let's really try to wrap our heads around, because again, this is critical. This is our oath that we made. Nechama Fleischman says, it just makes me think of Catholicism that says we are all sinners. All right. I'm not very well familiar with Catholicism, but I think these questions are forcing us to think deeper about these issues. So that's where we're holding now. Tanya is now going to say, let's define these words. Let's do some research. What is a tzaddik? What is a rasha? And what is a beinoni? Do you remember the word beinoni? What does the word beinoni mean? A beinoni is the name of the book. The book is called the Book of a Beinoni, the Book of Inbetweeners. So beinoni is a title for those in between tzaddik and a rasha. All right. Okay, Joanne is saying over here, you're asking, is a tzaddik one who follows Torah at a higher level? Yeah, I guess that's a fair assumption to make. How high? Right? Let's define it. Right? So the author says, you know, let's really get a serious, good handle on these terms. And as we're going to see, this conversation is going to be quite enlightening. It's not just going to be a random conversation, you know, a boring conversation. Let's try to define terms. This conversation is going to help. The author is bringing us to a point of seeing ourselves differently. It's very fascinating what's going to happen over here. I want to give you a little bit of a heads up. The Alter Rebbe is now going to take us on a scholarly journey. It's going to be scholarly, which is pretty atypical for Tanya. Tanya is generally more mystical. The whole style of Talmudic analysis is not what is not a regular style of Tanya. Here, the Alter Rebbe does it. The Alter Rebbe is going to start like an expert lawyer, bringing us different sources, different texts from the full gamut of the books of our sages, giving us an idea of what is a tzaddik, what is a rasha. And the Alter Rebbe is going to start helping us reach a conclusion. And this conclusion, towards the end of chapter 1, is going to propel us into our journey into Tanya. So we're not yet kind of at the Alter Rebbe is kind of getting us to the launch pad. I'll tell you when takeoff is. We really are going to get to the point of takeoff in the Tanya towards the end of chapter 1. Till then, the Alter Rebbe is kind of getting us there. The Alter Rebbe is going to take us kind of from the shallow end to the deep end. Part 2, page 20. Part 2, what is a tzaddik, rasha, and beinoni? What are these terms? Let's read inside. To properly understand, we need to first define the terms righteous person, which in Hebrew is tzaddik, or plural tzadikim, and wicked person, which is rasha, or plural rishaim. By the way, these are very important Hebrew terms. From now on, I'm only going to be using the Hebrew. Tzadik and rasha, or in the plural, tzadikim and rishaim. Because as we're going to see, righteous person doesn't mean anything. Righteous, that's not a definition. Wicked. Does a rasha really mean a wicked person? These are very lousy translations. We're going to have to rethink everything. What we think is a good person or a bad person, we have to totally rethink that. The journey begins. Let's read inside. Now, the Alter Rebbe says, we will explore we'll explore the explanation of these terms. Our first source. In the Talmud, we find 5 categories. The tzaddik who has it good in this world. 2, the tzaddik who has it bad in this world. 3, the rasha who has it good in this world. 4, the rasha who has it bad in this world. And number 5, the beinoni, who's somewhere in between. He's not a tzaddik, not either rasha. Not too good, not too bad. Mediocre. All right. These terms, tzaddik who has it good, tzaddik who has it bad, we're talking about just their life experience. You can have a righteous person who has it bad in this world, which means they have a life of suffering. They're such a good person, but for some reason they suffer. There's a tzaddik, there's rasha, there's beinoni, and there's 2 types of tzaddik. There's a tzaddik who has good, there is a tzaddik who has bad, there's a rasha who has good, there's a rasha who has bad. So here's going to be something very interesting. The Alter Rebbe is going to give us 2 different, very different, 2 totally different sets of definitions for these terms. One is the classical Talmudic definition. One is the mystical Kabbalistic definition. You know, like you could take out 2 dictionaries, right? You got the Webster dictionary, and then you got, I don't know, from some, right? What's it called? There's another university dictionary, and sometimes words have a slightly different definition. So even within the Jewish literature, tzaddik, rasha, beinoni, there's a Talmudic definition, there's a Kabbalistic definition. Very different. Let us check them out. This is the classical Talmudic definition, page 20. The Talmud explains that the worldly fortune or misfortune of a tzaddik is based on his or her behaviors. The tzaddik who has it good enjoys a fortunate life because he or she is totally righteous with no sins. The tzaddik who has it bad suffers misfortune because he or she is not totally righteous and does have some sins. Okay, what does this mean? If you look throughout the Talmud, throughout the entire Talmud, and if you look throughout all the texts of Jewish law, Maimonides famously, look through Maimonides' Code of Jewish Law. What's the definition of a tzaddik, a rasha, and a beinoni? Very simple. Tzaddik is a guy who has majority good deeds. 75% you're a good guy, 75% you do mitzvot, 75% you're being kind and nice and humble, all that good stuff, you're a tzaddik. You're mostly good. He's got 20, you could have 25% evil. You could have 35% evil. You could all mess up sometimes. Could be nasty one day, you know what I'm saying? You wake up in a bad mood, bad hair day, I don't know what. Okay, but as long as for the most part, you got good deeds, you're a tzaddik. A rasha, you have a majority bad deeds. All right, every bad guy does some nice stuff from now and then. So it's okay to be nice, a nice guy every now and then. But if you're the majority of your behaviors are bad, you're a rasha. A beinoni is somebody who falls squarely in between, roughly 50-50. Now, that is, and again, you could open up the Talmud 95% of the time in any classical text of Jewish law and Talmud, this is the definition. And I think this is also the This is also the intuitive definition, right? A guy who's mostly good, you're a tzaddik, you're a good guy. Look at you, you're amazing. Everybody has their bad days. Everybody, has a moment of weakness, but for the most part, you're a good guy. Majority good, you're good. A guy who's majority bad stuff, even if every now and then he's good, he's evil, right? If somebody 75% of the time you do business with him, he steals your money, you're bad, you're a thief. 25% of the time he's honest. It doesn't matter. 75% you're bad. And a beinoni, again, mediocre, somewhere in between. This is the classical standard definition. Now, what's this text coming and saying over here? I want to explain this to you. This piece of the Talmud that the Alter Rebbe quotes us here is where the Talmud discusses the classical, philosophical, even theological question. The question of all questions. Why do bad things happen to good people? You've ever heard of that question? This is where the Talmud discusses it. Why do bad things happen? Why do good things happen to bad people? So the Talmud says it's very simple. If there's a good person who has some bad, that's why they sometimes suffer in this world. Why? So this is the basic idea. I want to be very clear. Here in Tanya, this question, this philosophical question, why do bad things happen to good people, is not of relevance. But we're bringing down the piece of Talmud where it discusses this. I just want to give you some background so that we could understand this text. There are two stages of life. There's life in the current life here on earth, and there's the afterlife in heaven. Life in the afterlife is much better than life here. It's a much higher quality of life. It's a whole different type of life. And therefore, whatever happens in this world is only a small part of the picture. That's what the Talmud says. There is a tzaddik who is for the most part a tzaddik, but has 25% of sins. That explains why there are some righteous people who suffer. You know why? The suffering is part of their penitence. It's part of cleaning off the stain of those sins. And God wants to finish that business of dealing and cleaning up and wiping away the sins here in this life. It's like that in the afterlife. It could be blissful and there's no remnant of sins, and sins are of no issue anymore. That's what the Talmud says. A tzaddik who never suffers in this world, who has it good, that's because he's perfect, never made any sin. So he has a good life here and in the afterlife. Oh, the Talmud says, and why do good things happen to bad people? It's very simple. Not every bad guy has no mitzvahs. And for the mitzvahs that the bad guy does, they should get rewarded. So God rewards them here. It's like that in the afterlife, they shouldn't get the reward there because they're a bad guy. Let them get the lower quality good, and the better quality good they're not going to get because they've already been rewarded here. This is the classical answer from the Talmud. This is the text that we just read. There's a tzaddik who has it good, there's a tzaddik who has it bad, and it's all based on how many good deeds versus sins or transgressions or bad stuff they've done in their life. That's the Talmud. And again, the philosophical question is not of interest to us. Much ink has been spilled also after this top piece of Talmud. It's a big question, not for now. But here we have the classical Talmudic definition. Classical Talmudic definition is that we follow majority of behaviors. Let's look at a person. What do you do? What did you do your whole life? When you're a majority, you're a good guy, you're a tzaddik. Yeah, tzaddik is allowed to have some bad stuff. 25% bad stuff, no problem. 35%, 40%. Rasha, again, majority, we follow majority. For the most part, you're a bad guy. For the most part, you're a crook. You're a rasha. Yeah, it's okay. You could have 40% good stuff, but you're a rasha. Beinoni, you fall somewhere in between. You're neither here nor there. All right. This is the Talmudic definition. Sounds good? Let's now go to the mysticism. Let's go to the deep end. Mysticism is a whole different way of looking at stuff. Page 21. And dear friends, we may go a few minutes overtime, okay? Hopefully not more than 5 minutes, but I want to get at least to the middle of page 22, and I don't think it'll take us that long to get there, but I want to get to a good breaking point, all right? A good break point. Page 21 at the top, the Kabbalistic definition. In the Zohar, the classical text of Jewish mysticism, in the section called Raya Mehemna, Faithful Shepherd, on the Torah portion of Mishpatim. It's explained in a much deeper way. All right, let me tell you a little bit about the Zohar and the Raya Mehemna. All right. The Zohar is the written text of the discussions and the ideas presented in the study hall of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived in the 2nd century of the Common Era, close to 2,000 years ago. This was a special study hall where they studied the secrets of Jewish mysticism. So there were two different study halls. There was a study hall where they had Talmudic conversations, Talmudic discussions, Talmudic deliberations, and that was open to the public. And then you had the study halls of Kabbalah, which that was a lot more exclusive, right? Delta VIP Club, what's it called, right? You got to have the Delta card, your credit card, or else you can't get in with the fancy couches, all right? So this was the special top level, top paying club members. I'm just kidding. You didn't pay any money. You have to be a great scholar. You have to earn your way in over here to study in the study hall of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now, the Zohar has many different sections. One section is called Raya Mehemna, Faithful Shepherd. Faithful Shepherd has only one contributor. There's only one name who says everything in this section. The name is Moses. Moses himself showed up to the study hall of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai to teach the sages Kabbalah. There's only one question. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived about 1,500 years after Moses passes away. So that's a great question. What's Moses doing in the study hall of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? I guess when you're in the world of mysticism, mystical type of stuff happen. Okay, but that's the reality. Raya Mehemna, this section of the Zohar is Moses' contribution to the world of mysticism, which is quite fascinating. So this is a quote from Moses. You ready for Moses' quote? Moses comments on this piece of Talmud and says, these terms, a tzaddik who has it good, tzaddik who has it bad, reflect the inner character of the person. The Talmud says there's a tzaddik who has it good and says it in a very simplistic way. Tzaddik who has it good, tzaddik who has bad. Oh, we're talking about how much they're enjoying life, how fortunate their life is, or how misfortunate their life is, unfortunate life is. Moses says in Kabbalah, no, it's an inner description of who this person is. Let's read. The tzaddik who has it bad denotes the tzaddik who contains some bad within his or her character. However, the bad within him is suppressed by the good. One small little quote from the Zohar, 6 words, but 6 words gives us a whole new world of understanding. Tzaddik who has it bad. We're not talking about physical pleasure, physical fortune. We're talking about what's going on under the hood. What's going on with this person on the insides? Forget about behaviors. Behaviors are superficial. You want to know what's going on the inside? There's a tzaddik who has only good. If you could study their soul, you can find only good there. There's not a drop of evil. There's another type of tzaddik who has bad, but the bad is so little, so insignificant, that it is suppressed by the good. It never finds any expression. What's this Kabbalistic definition? Kabbalah is coming and saying, you want to know how to define tzaddik and rasha and beinoni? Don't look at their behaviors. Behaviors is not the way you look at it. Look only at what's going on in their soul. Do they have any evil? And the Kabbalah says like this: a human being who is motivated only by goodness, which simply means they do not have any impulse for bad. Every natural impulse is good and holy and altruistic. That is a tzaddik. A human being who all of their motives, generally speaking, or let's not go there. We don't know about a rasha, but this is what we have. Stop defining people by their behaviors. Define people by who they are, their inner worlds. Wow, Kabbalah is going very deep here. classically, we judge people, or the point is it's not that we judge people, but classically, the way to define people is based on what you do. Right? In a court of law, generally speaking, we judge people by what you done, what you did, not what you thought you would do, not what you dreamt about last night. Right? What did you do? What didn't you do? What did you do? And in the case of the, on surface layer Judaism, Talmud, Jewish law, we judge people, and we, the way we determine people's who you are is based on your behaviors. Kabbalah says the only way to categorize a person, to term a person, to give a person in a category, is based on who they are on the inside. Let's keep on reading. The Alter Rebbe right now is going to bring a very, very unique quote from the Talmud. Again, right, we're building up sources here. We're building up a case. It's a little bit scholarly. It's a little bit analytical. But the Alter Rebbe now brings a piece of Talmud, which is a very unique piece of Talmud, because it's an anomaly in the world of Talmud. The Talmud supports the Kabbalistic definition. Here's what the Talmud says. Let's read. We find the support to this deeper definition in the Talmud at the end of chapter 9 of Tractate Brachot. The Talmud says like this: Tzadikim, righteous people, are judged by the good inclination, Yetzer Tov, which means a judge. Who decides what's going to happen in life? What's their motivation? Only the good inclination. Rishaim, right, which loosely means wicked people, are judged by the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, right? Who judges? Who's the arbiter of what's going to be happening in this life, in this human being? The evil inclination. Beinonim are judged by both the good and bad inclination. Here we have a clear support in the Talmud that there's a deeper definition for Tzadik, rasha, and beinoni. Not what you do, not how much you do, not the ratio between good deeds and transgressions, but what is going on under the hood? What's going on in your insides? What's going on in the stuff that nobody else could see but you? Where are your motivations coming from? They're good or bad? Okay, let's continue inside. This Talmudic text is unique as it defines these categories by their inner worlds, not exterior behaviors. All right. Okay, the Talmud continues with a small little interesting anecdote. This citation from the Talmud continues. Here's a little anecdote. Rabbah said, Rabbah was one of the greatest sages that lived, I believe, in the 4th century of the Common Era. Rabbah says he was a leader of the academy in Pumbedisa. Pumbedisa was the main Talmudic academy in Babylonia. We're talking about somebody who had thousands upon thousands of students who studied. He was the greatest sage of his time. So Rabbah said, I, for example, am a beinoni. I'm kind of just in between. Abaye was his student, said back to him, Master, you make it impossible for anyone to live. For if you, one of the most pious sages, are a mere beinoni, then where does that leave the rest of us? Interesting story. Rabbah says, I'm a beinoni. So the Alter Rebbe concludes this issue. To truly define Tzadik, rasha, and beinoni needs a lot of clarification. The Alter is saying we don't really have full clarity yet. God willing, we'll get clarity as we continue learning. But at least we have the beginning of a working definition. Well, at least we're seeing this dichotomy, this binary. There's a Talmudic definition, which looks at the outer world of a person, behaviors, what you do. There's a Kabbalistic definition where we look very deeply, what is this person? Not what do this person do? What is this person internally? What's going on in the inner world? One last section of Tanya. One last interesting question. A little bit of a new question. And the Alter Rebbe asks, could we really choose our category? Our oath was be a tzaddik, don't be a rasha. And the Alter Rebbe says, asks a question, could you really choose what you're going to be in life? So let's read over here. Top of page 22. Also, we need to clarify what Job said, right? In Hebrew, that's Eov. Eov is, there's a book in our scripture called the book of Eov, the book of Job. So Job says like this, Talmud Bava Basra, chapter 1. Job says, Master of the universe, you have created righteous people and you have created wicked people, etc. What Job is saying is, God, how could you ever punish anybody? If somebody's righteous, you made them righteous. Somebody's wicked, you made them wicked. You're going to now punish them for their wickedness? You're not going to reward them for their righteousness? You're the one doing it. That's what Job says. The Alter Rebbe says, but this statement from Job seems to contradict the Talmudic statement. The Talmud teaches that the angel supervising conception questions God about the fate of a future child. Okay, let's go back to that piece of Talmud. The Talmud speaks about the experience, the spiritual events surrounding the conception and the birth of a child. So Talmud says, the very moment of conception, the moment of conception, the angel takes the embryo, holds it in his hands, brings it to God, and asks God what's going to be with this child. Will he or she be rich or poor? Smart or not so smart? Tall or short? All these good questions. Literally, the life story is determined by God. Vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream? Not just kidding. I don't think they speak about that there. But it's kind of true, right? We're born and we have a preference. Some people like vanilla ice cream. Some people like chocolate ice cream. Anyway, that's part of this. So every soul is born kind of with a very strong identity. God already gives the identity. But let's read inside. But the Alter Rebbe says, but the angel does not mention in his questions if the child will be righteous or wicked, since the matter is left to the individual's free choice. The Talmud makes it very clear. God never says about a person, this person will be righteous, this person will be wicked. No. That's called free choice. We get to choose what we're going to be. So the Alter Rebbe asks, how then can Job assert that God created righteous people when it is up to the individual to decide whether he or she will be righteous or not? We have two, again, contradicting sources here. One says God determines if you're going to be a tzaddik. Another source says, no, you get to make that choice. The answer is ultimately going to be they're both true. But this is all, again, putting together the pieces, putting together all the clues. And with all these clues, we'll start getting a very good, a very deep, but a very real definition of what it means to be a tzaddik, what it means to be a rasha, what it means to be a beinoni. And this is not just a random theoretical Talmudic conversation. Let's define words. When we could crack this nut, it opens up the journey of life. Once we crack this nut, the journey begins. We'll see how it's going to become a very, very meaningful idea over here. But with that, we conclude. We'll have to continue the journey next week into trying to figure out what does it mean to be a tzaddik? What does it mean to be a rasha? What does it mean to be a beinoni? All right. Well, I want to thank you all so much for joining. It's been wonderful. Of course, if you have any questions, don't go anywhere. We can Zoom away the whole night.
But you have children to attend to.
What was that?
You have children to attend to.
They're all sleeping. Thank God.
Oh, that's good.
Thank God. Thank God.
Okay,
6 a.m. 6 a.m. the duty continues, but until 6 a.m., we
Got all night.
Thank you, Rabbi Dubov. We'll see
All right.
you.
You're very welcome. Next week we continue with the next class. We'll continue rocking through chapter 1. And all right, and I'll follow up with all of you about meditation from Sinai. And okay, let's get some questions. Hillary, go ahead.
I always have a question.
Sure.
So when you're talking about the soul, not just saying someone's a good person or a bad person or an in-betweener, you're saying it's deeper, it's their soul. But if someone in their soul is a good person, then they're gonna do good deeds, right? And if someone in their soul is considered a bad person, they're gonna do bad deeds or have bad behaviors. Isn't that true?
Confusing.
That's
not necessarily true. Good people do bad things and bad people do good things.
No, I'm not saying that
They have inclinations. They have inclinations depending on the situation, I think.
I think somebody in their soul who is a good person will tend to do more good things. Of course, none of us are perfect, so we may, make mistakes and, but I think if someone's deep down in their heart a good person, most of the time they're going to do good things.
Okay,
But
so
again, none
Hillary,
of us are perfect.
so I'll tell you like this. We commonly think that we are a human being and we have one soul, and our souls kind of have different shades, and we have some goodness inside that soul, some bad stuff in that soul, and that's kind of what we are. that's common wisdom. We have a soul, and kind of, some people have a good soul, some people have a wise soul, some people have a pretty nasty soul, and that's kind of right. That's kind of who you are. What we're going to see in the Tanya is that it's a lot more complicated than that. It's a lot simpler than that. It's also a lot. That's the wrong model. We're going to get a model of how to look at ourselves, and your question will be answered. You're going to get clarity very quickly, either next class or the next class. Okay, Nechama, I want to. Sorry, Hillary. If you want to follow up, go ahead, Hillary. If you want to follow up.
No,
But I'll just say I don't want to spoil the answer yet.
no. And I'm really happy I decided to do this course because I think this is something that's bothered me for a long time. Like encountering people who do a lot of bad things, but then like they're really fake and they can come out super nice and people are fooled. I mean, I guess I'm super intrigued by that whole thing. Or somebody who's a really kind, good person, sometimes they're misunderstood. So
Yeah.
I guess.
But I just want to add something, Hillary, that in the Tanya, we are not on a journey of how to judge other people. We are very much on a very personal journey. This is all about us, nobody else, right? Like we put on the cover here, I very deliberately titled the class, The Kabbalah of You, and I made that you very dark, a big you, only about you, nobody else. So that's I think that's a very important thing over here. This book, as the Alter Rebbe said, it's not a book of just philosophy where we get to talk about interesting topics. It's very much a book about us, about our growth, about our life, but getting to understand us a little bit better. And Nechama is asking a question right on this topic. Nechama is writing, who is the judge this is talking about, us or God? I think it's very important. We don't judge other people, period. Period, period, period. Nowhere in Judaism is ever a place for one individual to judge another individual. Not our spouse, not our parents, not our children, not our neighbor, nobody. God judges us, that's it. And we can judge ourselves. But even judging ourselves, we can't be too hard on ourselves. We got to make sure we're doing it right. Tanya's going to walk us right through the process.
I guess I was surprised by your breakdown of the Tzadik, beinoni, and the rasha based on percentages, because for Tzadik, I thought 75-25, that seems like a very low bar in a way.
Yeah, right. Listen, this is the Talmudic definition. In the world of Kabbalah, such a person is not a tzaddik at all. We'll get to there.
Okay.
From a Kabbalistic perspective, it's a whole different story, a whole different set of metrics, a whole different set of criteria in order to be a tzaddik, and it's a lot more advanced, absolutely. But according to the Talmudic definition, it doesn't take much to be a tzaddik. All of us could be a tzaddik. Just get past 51% and you're there.
Oh, wow.
You're already there. I'm saying, really, we're probably all there. We're all, according to the Talmud, we are all tzaddikim. So the author is going to have to explain to us, why is there this binary? Why does the Talmud say one thing, and then why does the world of Jewish mysticism say something else? There's an explanation. We'll get there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Bye-bye. See you next time.
Thank you.
We'll see you all next week.
Yeah.
All right?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Take care, everyone. Stay well.
Take
Be well.
care.
Bye-bye.